The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. A neutral and educational account. Imagine a war that raged for 8 years, claimed over 1 million lives, and ended with both sides exactly where they started. No victory, no peace, just devastation. This is not fiction. This is the Iran-Iraq War, the forgotten conflict that shaped the modern Middle East and still casts its shadow today. Why did two nations go to war? What drove them to keep fighting when everything was lost? And how did the world stand by and watch? Music swells, visuals of destroyed cities, young soldiers, and maps. Chapter 1. Roots of Conflict. To understand the war, we must start with the backdrop of two rising powers, each with conflicting visions for the Middle East. Iran, fresh out of a revolution in 1979, had undergone a massive transformation. The monarchy under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had been overthrown in a populist uprising. Out of the power vacuum rose Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a cleric whose vision was not only religious, but revolutionary. Khomeini's Islamic Republic was based on the idea of wilayat al-faqih, ruled by Islamic jurists, and called for the export of Islamic revolution throughout the Muslim world. This alarmed secular and monarchical Arab regimes, particularly Iraq. Iraq, meanwhile, was ruled by the Ba'ath Party, a secular, socialist, pan-Arab, nationalist movement. Saddam Hussein, although not yet formally president until July 1979, had already consolidated power behind the scenes. He aimed to make Iraq the leader of the Arab world. But Saddam faced a demographic challenge. Though his regime was Sunni-dominated, the majority of Iraq's population was Shia. The rise of a Shia theocracy next door, calling for Islamic revolution, threatened the delicate balance within Iraq. Beyond ideology, the two countries had unresolved disputes. The most prominent was over the Shat al-Arab waterway, vital for oil exports and maritime trade. Iran and Iraq had previously signed the 1975 Algiers Agreement, in which Saddam ceded claims in return for Iran halting support for Kurdish rebels in northern Iraq. After the revolution, Saddam saw an opportunity to reverse that deal. Adding fuel to the fire were long-standing ethnic tensions, border skirmishes, and accusations of interference in domestic affairs. Each country accused the other of harboring and supporting dissidents. By 1980, the atmosphere was one of mutual suspicion, provocation, and a desire to project strength. Saddam, perceiving a weakened Iran and emboldened by Western and Arab Gulf support, made his move. Chapter 2. The invasion begins. On September 22, 1980, Iraq launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. It began with airstrikes aimed at Iranian air bases, attempting to ground the Iranian Air Force. Ground troops advanced along multiple fronts, most notably toward Khuzestan, a southwestern province of Iran rich in oil and home to a large Arab population. Saddam believed the war would be quick. He calculated that Iran's military, weakened by purges and reorganization after the revolution, would collapse under the pressure. He also assumed that Iran's ethnic Arabs would rise up in support of Iraqi forces. But this prediction was catastrophically wrong. The Iranian population, despite its internal turmoil, rallied around national defense. Revolutionary fervor turned into patriotic mobilization. The regular army, the Artesh, and the newly formed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, began cooperating. Alongside waves of civilian volunteers, called the Basij, the city of Khorramshahr became the symbol of this resistance. Fierce, urban combat broke out. The battle lasted over a month and resulted in thousands of casualties on both sides. Iraq eventually captured the city, but the high cost made it a Pyrrhic victory. Iran's morale strengthened. Visual sequence. Archival footage of besieged volunteers, destroyed buildings in Khorramshahr. Maps showing the progression of the invasion. Chapter 3. Iran's counteroffensive. By early 1981, Iran had reorganized its forces. Young volunteers trained quickly. The IRGC, once a ragtag militia, developed into a professional fighting force. The military's morale soared, bolstered by a narrative of religious duty and national pride. In 1982, Iran launched massive counteroffensives. Operation Beit al-Muqaddas was the most significant. It aimed to retake Khorramshahr and push Iraq out of Iranian territory. After weeks of heavy fighting, Iranian forces recaptured the city in May 1982. This moment was emotional and symbolic. It was declared a divine victory. Thousands of Iraqi soldiers were captured. Iran's leadership was triumphant. And now they faced a choice: end the war on their own terms, or take the fight into Iraq. Ayatollah Khomeini chose to continue. The war, once defensive, now became offensive. Iran sought to punish Iraq, remove Saddam, and possibly inspire Iraqi Shia uprisings. They believed a broader Islamic revolution could still take root in Baghdad. Operations such as Ramadan, Dawn, and Karbala followed. These involved large-scale infantry assaults, often using human wave tactics, with young Basij volunteers charging into fortified Iraqi lines. Casualties were enormous. Insert viewer question: if your country had pushed the invader out, would you risk more lives to invade back? Chapter 4. Stalemate. Trench warfare. Andatrosit. From 1983 onwards, the war entered a brutal stalemate. The front lines froze. Trenches, bunkers, minefields, and barbed wire stretched across the desert. The war began to resemble World War I. Entire operations would be launched to gain mere kilometers of land, at the cost of tens of thousands of lives. Both sides suffered. Iraq had more advanced weapons, including tanks and aircraft. Iran had manpower and willpower, but technology was on Saddam's side. And with that came chemical weapons. Iraq began using mustard gas and later nerve agents. These weren't just battlefield weapons. They were used against civilians, most notoriously in the Kurdish city of Halabja in 1988, where thousands of people died in a single chemical bombing. Iran had no chemical weapons in response. It turned to asymmetrical warfare, guerrilla raids, infiltration tactics, and psychological warfare. Yet, the human cost mounted. Back home, cities like Tehran, Disfol, and Avas were bombed. Civilians lived in fear. Propaganda posers of martyrs, often teenage boys, filled the streets. Chapter 5. Global involvement and the tanker war. The war spread beyond the battlefield. In the Persian Gulf, Iran and Iraq targeted oil tankers and merchant ships, trying to cripple each other's economies. This phase became known as the tanker war. Global oil supply was threatened. Western powers took notice. The United States began escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers. Naval confrontations occurred, including the downing of an Iranian civilian airliner by the USS Vincennes in 1988, killing all 290 on board. An incident still remembered with anger in Iran. Iraq received aid from Arab Gulf states, France, the Soviet Union, and later covert US intelligence. Iran was increasingly isolated. Arms embargoes and sanctions made procurement difficult. The Iran-Contra scandal revealed that the US had secretly sold weapons to Iran via intermediaries, exposing the complex web of Cold War realpolitik. Meanwhile, the United Nations attempted to mediate. Resolution 598, passed in 1987, called for a ceasefire. Iran initially rejected it, demanding reparations and blaming Iraq for starting the war. Insert viewer question: when world powers fuel both sides of a war, who's really responsible for the outcome? Chapter 6. Collapse and ceasefire. By 1988, both nations were drained. Iraq, bolstered by new weapons and intelligence, launched successful offensives, recapturing lost territory. Iran faced internal fatigue. The economy was crumbling. Casualties were overwhelming. Public opinion turned, and even hardliners began to waver. On July 18, 1988, Ayatollah Khomeini accepted Resolution 598. He described it as drinking from a poisoned chalice, acknowledging the painful reality of ending the war without achieving strategic goals. The ceasefire went into effect on August 20th, 1988. Both sides agreed to a return to pre-war borders. And the last chapter, Aftermath and Legacy, the human cost is staggering. More than 1 million dead, millions injured, millions more displaced. Entire cities were destroyed. Economic infrastructure was decimated. In Iraq, Saddam emerged claiming victory. But with a country in debt, a military emboldened, and ambitions unchecked. In 1990, just 2 years later, he invaded Kuwait, sparking the Gulf War. In Iran, the war became foundational to the identity of the Islamic Republic. It reinforced the siege mentality and became a justification for internal repression. The Besieging IRGC gained significant power, becoming pillars of the regime. The war also set precedents in international law, particularly concerning chemical weapons, attacks on civilians, and maritime warfare. For ordinary people, the trauma persisted. Families lost generations. Veterans returned home with little support. An entire region was left scarred. This war didn't just redraw maps. It reshaped minds, identities, and futures. It began with dreams of dominance, but ended with a brutal lesson. Some wars have no winners, only survivors. What can we learn from a war that ended exactly where it started, but changed everything in between?